This week on the Bowling Center, we have Stu Williams. We have Geek Talk, a special episode for the geeks. We also have a guy ripping me for wearing a polo with a blazer, and I'm going to take him down in troll bowling. Coming next on the Bowling Center.
Gets the strike.
Welcome, bowling friends, to Schlub Central. This is the Bowling Center, and I am Jason Thomas, the bowling guy.
Yes.
And this is my sidekick, Jeff Goodger, the internet bowling personality.
Also, yes.
Yes, and we are going to talk World Series of Bowling, we're going to talk geeks and bowlers, and we are going to talk some random guy on the internet ripping me for wearing a polo with a blazer. But first, let us recap this edition of the World Series of Bowling. Yesterday we saw the Viper Championship on ESPN, and it was quite a finish.
Week 2 of the PBA on ESPN season featured the Viper oil pattern and a whole lot of blue. Blue was such a theme that PBA Tour Commissioner Tom Clark was overheard yelling, "No, no, 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 no! I told you I wanted the oil to match Chris Barnes' pants, not Jason Belmonte's shirt!" In match 1, Belmo bucked the blue trend and decided to start with a gold IQ Tour from Storm.
That's a 2-8-10 split.
Big mistake. Stu Williams decided to go with a decidedly more bluish Crossroad, also from Storm, to take the early lead in the match.
Light hit, carries the rack.
Williams also held on to the lead after he blew by the headpin in the 4th, and made the unusual 1-5-7-8 spare conversion for probably the first time on television.
Good. Perfect conversion for Stu Williams.
Could someone get Stu a blue ribbon? After Belmo switched to the much bluer Marvel S in the 5th, his luck started to turn.
He looks on.
Hard back.
Yes! Calls it, doubles.
But Stu would answer back in the 6th with a double of his own.
Yeah! Stu Williams now.
After Belmo threw a couple of spares in the 7th and 8th, and Stu sat down after the 9th with a possible 226, Belmo needed a strike or two, or he would be singing the blues and heading home.
And the 4-pin.
That'll all but do it.
In match 2, Chris Barnes took the stage with his trusty sidekick, Bugsy Smurf. Well, actually, Columbia 300 brand manager and tour rep Bugsy Kelly. Despite not having any blue balls, which some might consider a good thing, Barnes was determined to make a match of it with a strike in the 4th.
The jump into the deep end, and Barnes converts it for a strike.
Williams held on to the lead in the match until the 6th, when he blew a 3-6-10 conversion for the first time in 6 tries during the tournament.
And an open frame will even the match.
But Beef Stew still found himself in the match, after Barnes failed to strike in the 7th or the 8th frames, after which the one-man Blue Man group voiced his displeasure with the way his fellow right-handed showmates blew open the oil pattern in pre-match practice.
Go!
Didn't go. Double wood.
You guys did such a good job of breaking this one down.
After Stu struck in the 9th, Barnes had a chance to close out the match if he could somehow find a way to throw a turkey. So he blew off where everyone else was playing, switched to a Columbia 300 Smackdown, and moved 3 arrows right.
Oh, he moved right.
Cured it.
Barnes moves right and goes with the high hardwood up 2nd arrow.
After striking again in the 10th, he needed just one more to shut out Williams and move on to the final.
Yes! Game, set, match. Barnes needs 3.
But before the final was to take place, it was time to strike. More specifically, time to see which PBA League franchise player could throw the most strikes in 90 seconds. The Brooklyn-style Sean Rash went first and got 3.
That's 3.
Motown's Mike Fagan raised the bar with 4 for his turn.
We got a leader. Mike Fagan, 4 strikes.
After a quick wardrobe change from hideous blue to horrible green, Silver Lake's Barnes tied Fagan with 4 strikes of his own.
Oh, he gets the fortuitous crumble.
LAX's Jason Belmonte then put on a show, taking the lead with 5. And it could have been more if this one would have counted.
He got it off! And it's struck!
Down!
That
goes
counts!
the 6-pin.
We need a ruling. Does that count?
Oh, come on. How does that not count? That was a remarkable shot under the circumstances, and there might be a protest if that strike is the cost me the lead.
Philly's Bill O'Neill then tied Belmonte with 5, which could have been more as well if those darn pin boys had been a little faster. Or was it the ball return gremlins? The tie forced a 1-ball roll-off, and after tying with 7 in the first round, Belmo scored 8 on his shot in the second, forcing O'Neill to get 9 or better to win.
And that's enough. That's enough. O'Neill and the Philadelphia Hitmen will take this PBA League Challenge.
In the Viper Championship final, tournament leader Ryan Simonelli looked to be the favorite after the 3 right-handers had combined for a high score of 203 in the previous 2 matches. And after doubling in the 4th and taking a 27-pin lead over Barnes, title number 2 looked like it might be an inevitability. But Barnes fought back, throwing a turkey in frames 3 through 5.
Yes! And all of a sudden, Barnes comes right back.
Simonelli maintained the lead through 8 frames, but Barnes kept himself alive with a clutch strike in the 9th.
Yes! Flash drill
right there! We're not done yet.
After striking in his 9th frame, Simonelli had a chance to step up and throw the first strike in the 10th to win.
Right, and a 7-10 split.
If he could make the split, Barnes would still need a double in the 10th.
Oh my, just missed.
Wow, did someone get the number of that 7-pin? He almost hit me. Now Barnes needed the first strike in the 10th to take home title number 16.
For the win. Yeah! High flush! The work's not done yet, but the heavy lifting is.
After another strike and a 9 count on his fill ball, Barnes was holding the trophy. And while his balls might not have been blue this week, they were definitely pretty big.
Another title for Chris Barnes, Jason.
Yeah, that's trophy number
16
for Chris Barnes on the PBA Tour, and it really looks like he looks forward to bowling on TV now. Threw that double in the 10th when Simonelli opened the door, and I think Mark Baker's given him some real keys to focus on television, and I think Barnes is really looking forward to bowling on TV a lot more to pad that career stat total.
And something else he's seemed to pad quite well is his brain when it comes to bowling geekery. He's known around the tour for knowing the most minute, inane everything about bowling, but he's not the only one out there, so we thought we would give some other bowlers a chance and find out just who is the alpha nerd in a segment we are calling Geek Talk.
What is the relationship between RG and diff? Diff makes the ball go a little longer. Well, lower diff makes the ball go a little longer. RG makes the ball spin a little more, spin a little less, depending on what the numbers are.
Why would you use an asymmetric core?
Well, because of the mass bias, because you have a greater potential for flare. And so by how you lay those out, you can really create more options as far as motion.
How would you explain lane topography?
I try not to pay a whole lot of attention to it. I pay more attention to the bowlers that I'm following, and really more than the lane topography.
What is your favorite oil and why?
My name's not Chris Barnes, brother. No favorite oil here. I just bowl.
What is the importance of a weight hole?
Weight holes add flare potential. When balls get a little bit weak and they're not quite turning the corner, you can pop an extra hole in the side and add a little bit of flare potential, help them get around the corner.
How would you explain lane topography?
Lane topography, well, that's really depends on the installer and how good and detailed of a job they do to get that lane flat. You know, there's so many screws and panels. There's just so much lane that you're gonna have little valleys and peaks, and it's gonna happen. And it gives more character, I think.
These are not boxer shorts. Mine are boxer shorts. Well, what's the difference? These are Hanes 32.
What is the relationship between RG and Diff?
Oof, I am not the right person to ask that question. I can't answer that.
What's the difference between wood and synthetic lanes?
There's a lot there. Wood has more characteristic on it. As you bowl on it more, the wood gets depressed more in certain areas. So it becomes where there's a lot more characteristics on a wood lane than there is on a synthetic lane.
Michael Haugen, what is the importance of a weight hole?
You know, there's a lot of different theories on the weight hole. If you ask Brian Voss, the weight hole is a cheating hole. It's for guys that can't get the ball to hook, but really the weight hole, in my opinion, came when all these bowling balls became exotic. And there was so many different RG levels and differential levels and so forth that you kind of needed an extra hole to balance out, you know, as soon as you swing a CG out. So what does it do to a bowling ball? I think it just makes it read the lane a little sooner.
Chris Barnes, how would you break down the scorpion pattern?
With a lot of surface. Oh, you mean how would I actually describe the pattern?
Whatever.
Yeah. No, it's long. It's going to play probably fairly similar to how it played in Milwaukee in that 50-foot Badger. It's a little more volume in the mid lane there, but the surface here, you know, hooks in the track a little bit, not as much as it did in Milwaukee. For all the talk about how much South Point hooks, it turns out I think it maybe not as much as we all thought before. So the added volume seems like it holds up. We're going to end up deep, but it's not going to be a lot of angle down lane.
So why is mass bias important in general?
It's basically for people who have a hard time getting the ball to change directions. If you're very rolly like me, or if you don't have a lot of, if you don't have a lot of axis rotation, actually you don't like mass bias much. And if you're more rev dominant, you don't like mass bias much. But if you need more help in the mid lane direction and getting the ball to change direction, mass bias can help you.
Why would you use a low RG ball?
Predictability. RG, in my opinion, reads the mid 20 feet of the lane, and the lower the RG, the more predictable it is in that part of the transition. And so it blends transitions out and it makes predictable moves in the mid lane, which allows you to control the pocket.
What is the difference between RG and Diff?
RG is the radius gyration, and it's basically the difference between how center heavy a ball is and how top heavy, and differential is the actual flare, how much and how long that ball will continue to hook down the lane.
Why might you use an asymmetric core?
When I've run out of all other options for me, but it's basically the same thing. For asymmetry is basically to create more mid lane, accentuates the mid lane reaction, and so anytime I'm having a hard time getting the ball to change directions, that's when I'm going to go look for asymmetry.
What is the generic difference in general terms between wood and synthetic lanes?
Wood has more texture, and because anything that's wood now is 40 years old, it's going to hook a lot sooner than synthetics.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Welcome back to the Bowling Center. Next, we are going to be talking about England's Stu Williams.
I know Stu Williams. He's a very interesting character out on the PBA Tour. You get a few characters here and there, and he stands out.
Yes, he's going to be getting married pretty soon to Tina Stickney, beautiful young lady from Arizona, and that's where Stu kind of spends time between there in England and jumping around the world. And Mike J. Laneside, before the start of the World Series, had a chance to catch up and chat with Stu Williams in this week's edition of Having Beers with Bowlers.
Well, Having Beers with Bowlers is just the title of the series, so I know Stuart Williams is a teetotaler, so I'll have a beer with you. The international players have really burst onto the scene the last couple of years, and you're at the top of the list. When did you feel that you had made it among the greatest in the world?
I don't think we have. I think that's maybe why we're bowling a bit better, because we don't feel like we've got that position. You know, we always feel like we've got that bit of a chip on our shoulder, and I think it compels us to, try and push to that next level. And I think that if you're talking about the very top echelons of the game, I mean, you've really got Mika and Osku and Jason. And then I think the rest of us are maybe on that next step down, still at the moment.
So tell me, is it true? Do you get away with more because of the English accent?
No.
No.
Yeah, of course we do. Yeah, I mean, You know,
it just sounds so much more civilized when you
say
it.
People tell me that when I curse, and I mean, obviously that's only on a really small amount of times that, you know, I get slightly upset and, you know, maybe utter a curse word. But it doesn't sound quite so bad. I mean, I don't think my mother would agree, but the Americans seem to think that way. So.
You know, people talk about growing up to be a professional bowler and traveling the world. You do that. Tell me about your frequent flyer miles. I mean, you put on a lot of miles.
Yeah, I got to like 175 with Delta last year, so yeah, you get to see quite a few different planes. I haven't quite turned into the plane spotter yet. You know which plane you're going to be on and whether the. I mean, I sat next to a guy the other day and he said, "Oh yeah, this seat always has the power socket on this plane, but it doesn't on the other plane." I'm like, really, dude? Like, but I mean, one guy told me when I checked in, the lady didn't recognize the diamond status or whatever it is, and the guy next to her, boss, told her that I basically lived on a plane, was what she said. So yeah, I mean, I don't mind sitting on a plane. I'm not like Patrick. He wants to drive everywhere. He once told me they wanted a bridge from New York to London. I couldn't think of anything worse. But you know, he likes driving. Worked out good for me. I just sat next to him. We just talked at each other constantly for 8-hour journeys. So.
Where'd you meet Tina?
I met Tina in a bowling tournament in Panama. So yeah, that's where it started.
And things have progressed, haven't they?
Yeah, we're gonna get married next year. So that's pretty exciting. So might get married in England in April. So hopefully it doesn't rain.
In England, excellent.
Yeah, so yeah, fingers crossed for good weather that one day. Probably rain every day around it, but you know.
That's good. That's good bowling weather.
Well, Jason, for 2 weeks now, I've laid the smackdown on you in our little bowling contest. This week, I get to literally lay the smackdown on you, as Bugsy Kelly from Columbia 300 has sent us a couple of smackdowns.
Yeah, he did. So thanks to Bugsy for that. But hopefully this week I'll be able to turn it around. Last week's performance was a little pathetic. Usually when you're giving someone 40 pins a game, you don't lose by 150 scratch. So maybe this week I can do a little better. But first we got to drill these balls and lay them out for our games in this week's segment of the Drilling Room. So here we are again in the man cave. We've got 2 more bowling balls to drill.
Smackdown.
The Smackdown. The wrestling named bowling balls from Columbia 300. Thanks to Bugsy Kelly for sending us these 2 15-pound monsters.
If it's good enough for Chris Barnes, then it's good enough for me.
Yes, it is. And so we are going to drill these up. The previous 2 weeks, we drilled the Motive Sigma Sting, which was drilled quite aggressively for the both of us. Then we had the Rotogrip Totally Defiant last week, which is a little less aggressive. And these balls will be
even more less aggressive.
Yes, right, correct. More or less aggressive. And but first we got to put some surface on these babies. So why don't we take these over to the ball spinner and change the surfaces a little bit.
Flowers on the wall, that don't bother me at all. Playing solitaire till dawn with the deck of 51. Smoking cigarettes and watching
All right, so we got our 2 Smackdowns. We've got Jeff Goodger's here. He's still got the little bit of dull surface on it, but we moved his pin up, kicked out the CG. We're going to put a low hole here to give him a little bit of flair. And on the other side, we've got the Bowling Guys Smackdown. It's shiny. We got the pin up, but we got it kicked out a little bit, so it's about a 4.5-inch pin versus the 5-inch pin on the Totally Defiant. And no hole, just a little bit offset, and that should give it a little bit of length and some pop on the back end.
Hello, bowling/wrestling fans, and welcome to what is likely going to be the greatest bowling match since Count Gangler took on Jimmy Bluin with a couple of round chunks of lignum vitae. Or it could be the best mashup of bowling and wrestling since Jason Belmonte took on Vin Gerard. I'm PB Atkinson, and even though I normally only get out of bed for nothing less than 25 grand and perpetual bottle service, today I've decided to lend my talents to these two hapless schlubs who are about to take part in an utterly meaningless bowling match using two identical Columbia 300 Smackdown bowling balls. In the red corner, we have Jason the Bowling Guy Thomas, who in spite of somehow conning bowl.com to post several book averages in excess of 225 under his name, has yet to come close to that in two previous matches here. In the blue corner, we have Jeff Internet Bowling Personality Goodger, who craftily wheedled 40 pins a game of handicap from the Bowling Guy, then unleashed his first ever 700 series in last week's match. Time now to head out to the lanes and see which bowler will be checking into the Smackdown Hotel this week. Game 1 gets off to an ugly start for the Bowling Guy, as he wraps the head pin around the 10 on the washout like The Rock wrapping a chair around Ken Shamrock's neck. But Jeff Goodger pays back the favor by whiffing the 2-8 worse than a missed clothesline. After a double, the Bowling Guy looks to get Goodger in a headlock, but a nasty blower 7 allows Mr. Personality to wiggle his way free and then put on a series of his own vicious counter moves. The Bowling Guy then flags a couple of easy spares to finish the game, putting himself into a hole bigger than Andre the Giant's belly button after Game 1, 238 to 163. The punches really started flying in Game 2, with both guys hurling strikes at each other like angry fans hurling chairs into the ring. But with a chance for 259, Jason stepped up in the 9th and was stopped cold by this stone-cold 8-pin. I felt that one up here. Jeff then got up in the 10th and delivered the power bomb, finishing with a scratch 224 to Jason's 213. Trailing by an insurmountable 126 pins, the final game became a hideous torture session for Jason, and despite his best efforts to hulk up, the damage had already been done. After laying the smackdown on Jason's candy ass with a series of deft finishing moves, Jeff took a big 3-0 lead in the series, leaving Jason wondering where his mojo had gone, or if it had ever been there in the first place. Reporting from Harley's Simi Bowl, this is PB Atkinson, promising never to again set foot in a bowling center or a wrestling ring unless properly compensated, or at least offered a 6-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon.
So another smackdown for me, Jeff. I am down 3-0 in our series, and another pathetic performance for the supposedly decent bowler.
Well, that's not only 3 wins, but that's 2 scratch wins now, Jason, for me.
So I'm feeling in a very, very sour mood, and that means it's a really good time for this week's edition of Troll Bowling. So this week we found an individual on the PBA's YouTube page, and as you guys know out there in the bowling world, I do World Series of Bowling highlight shows prior to each year's World Series where we recap the winners, and it's kind of a nice segment because it kind of commemorates the player who won each World Series event. We show it live in the arenas during the ESPN telecast, and then people who weren't able to see the show get to watch it. And probably the best one I think I did out of last World Series was the Parker Bone episode where he won the World Championship, and it was a really heartwarming story. Parker Bone helped out with Hurricane Sandy. He almost decided not to come to the World Series, and he made it last minute. He got in at 24th on the World Championship cut line. Then he got in at 5th for the stepladder cut line, and then he won with his whole family there, and he's always a class act, and it was just a really great story. So I posted this episode on the PBA's YouTube page, and I go back a couple of days later to see what the comments are, and one of the first comments was some guy saying, "Who wears a polo with a blazer?" Really? That's your comment? You see this great story about Parker Bone, and all you can do is rip the schlub who doesn't even want any attention. He just wants to do the stupid episode and commemorate Parker Bone III, and he doesn't even care. Obviously, look at my appearance. I've given up caring about how I look a long time ago, so it's not about that. But all you've got to say is, "Who wears a polo with a blazer?" But my favorite part of the story, Jeff, is when you go to YouTube and you post on there, you get a little profile picture right next to your post. And this guy was about 400 pounds. He had a football jersey on and about 6 days of stubble. And he's criticizing me for my appearance. Dude, really? You've just been troll bowled. All right, Jeff, I feel a little better now about my hapless bowling performance earlier on the show.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you very much.
I felt fine the whole time anyway.
But next week we've got another great World Series of Bowling telecast on ESPN. It's the Chameleon Championship, and what do we expect to see on that week's show?
I am excited to see Ryan Simonelli coming off that 7-10 that pretty much cost him the Viper Championship this week. And he's third seed, taking on Tom Smallwood, the fourth seed, to start the show. And the winner gets Brian Kretzer, the winner gets Don Barrett. So I will be interested to see how Simonelli bounces back from that hideous 7-10.
Yeah, that was a rough finish to that show, but Simonelli's tough, and he's on a mission to win his second title. So we'll see what happens next week. Monday again, after the show, we'll have another episode of the Bowling Center. We're going to talk the Chameleon Championship. We'll have another drilling room segment. We'll see if I can finally get on the board against Mr. Goodger here, who turns out to be a horrible, filthy sandbagger, and is kicking my butt in that segment. So thanks again for watching. I'm Jason Thomas, the bowling guy. This is Jeff Goodger, the internet bowling personality. Make sure to watch the ESPN finals of the Chameleon Championship coming up next Sunday on ESPN, and then the next edition of the Bowling Center on Monday.